And the fight's going to get very testy next year as it becomes an election year. But Nauru is the issue today, also Manus Island. Joining us is Richard Marles. He's the Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs and the member for Corio, a member of Julia Gillard's government. Richard, thanks for coming in.
Good afternoon, Raph. How are you?
And Kelly O'Dwyer is the Liberal member for Higgins. That's Peter Costello's old seat. She is part of Tony Abbott's opposition. Kelly, thank you for coming in.
Great to be with you, Raph, and nice to be with you, Richard.
Indeed.
Now, we are going to discuss this crazy idea of Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull somehow forming a new party. I don't think it's a serious idea, but we do need to occasionally touch base on why people dislike politicians or seem to have turned off them, whether or not that's any worse than it used to. But the big news today is the Immigration Minister, Chris Bowen, has made some announcements around the offshore processing of asylum seekers. The first group of people have been sent to Manus Island in PNG. There are already around nearly 400 people in Nauru. Just have a little listen to the Immigration Minister, Chris Bowen, speaking just a few hours ago.
I'm concerned about the welfare of all asylum seekers. Let me answer your question. Those who come to Australia by boat and those who don't come to Australia by boat. I've said repeatedly that the no advantage test will mean that people will wait for a very substantial period. Could it be 5 years? Yes, it could.
That's Chris Bowen speaking there. Of course, it's a little undefined how long people might spend overseas. I suspect that's the government's point. Richard Marles, I'll start with you. I'll get onto the 5 years or not in a moment. It's a bit of a concession, though, today's announcement, isn't it? I think there's 8,000 people who've come since this set of arrangements were announced. Today is really saying, listen, pull factors aren't as important as push factors, isn't it?
Well, today's announcement is about further implementing the Houston review. It's about making sure that those who are processed onshore are done in a way where the no advantage test also applies.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that we've got Manus online, and we now have Manus online as of this morning. And it's also about returning people to their countries of origin when they're found not to be refugees. And 100 Sri Lankans in the biggest involuntary transfer that we've had so far since the 13th of August have been returned to Sri Lanka. So,
but if you're setting up a new detention centre in Tasmania, you're rapidly trying to build more capacity. I mean, the main point, whether or not people agree with where asylum seekers are put, they are continuing to come, aren't they? You're not deterring them as you hoped you would.
Look, I think there is deterrence going on. There is more deterrence that's needed. That is true. And the way in which we get that is by being able to fully implement the Houston panel's review. And in order to do that, we need to implement Malaysia. But that requires the opposition to stop playing politics and to actually come on board to that. I mean, this is a very difficult issue to solve whilst one party is out there trying to make political hay around it. It would be a difficult issue to solve if everyone was on the same page, if all the political parties were. But when one party is trying to make politics out of this, it is difficult. We are working through the Houston panel's review. It would be very good if Malaysia was on board. The opposition are the ones who hold the key to that.
Kelly O'Dwyer, you're the difference between successful deterrence and not.
Well, I simply don't accept that. Look, the Houston report was very clear. It said that the government's supposed, border protection schemes had been an absolute failure. Since November of 2007, we have seen now more than 30,000 people come illegally by boat. In the last 3 years of the coalition government, we saw less than 300 people come by boat. We had a very, very strong deterrence scheme already in place. It was a combination of temporary protection visas, offshore processing, and making sure that where it was safe to do so, boats were turned around. This was pretty comprehensive, and as I said, we saw during that scheme the fact that less than 300 people came in the last 3 years. Now, under the government's changes, we have seen the government admit to many multiple failures. We've had more than 30,000 people come, as I've said, and we have also seen the fact that the government have been desperately lurching from one idea to the other. The government had East Timor as the solution. They didn't ask the East Timorese government about it. Then they said PNG. Then, of course, they said Malaysia was going to be a solution, stripping out human protection rights. All of that deeply concerned us. And we've said there's one very, very clear way to solve this issue. We're happy to work with the government. We don't want to play politics on it. It's too important. In fact, we've seen more than 1,000 people lose their lives on the sea. It is not a political football.
But doesn't it actually show, I mean, if you've got people on hunger strikes in Nauru and you're happy, the government can't keep up with the capacity on Nauru and also at Manus Island, maybe it actually doesn't really matter what we do. Even if, just say you get into government and you manage to turn around a few boats, it doesn't actually seem to matter the way that people are received. They are still desperate to come here. Maybe it's time to concede that we can't actually influence whether or not people come here by boat.
Well, as I said, you only need to look at history, and you know, Raf, that we were able to implement a very effective deterrence
But that
scheme.
wasn't just because of
and
what
at the
was done
same
here.
time, but at the same time, we were the most generous country in our resettlement scheme. You know, that's something we're very proud of. That's something that we in coalition government were very proud of too. But it needs to be an orderly scheme, and what we will not abide is the idea that you have people smugglers determining who it is that comes to Australia illegally by boat.
1300 222 774. You might have a query or a question for Richard Marles. He's the Junior Foreign Affairs Minister, member for Corio as well, Labor MP. And Kelly O'Dwyer is with me, the Liberal member for Higgins in Tony Abbott's coalition. 1300 222 774. You can text as well, of course, 0437 774 774. Richard, do you really think you can stop people getting on boats to come here?
Well, I do think that there is an influence that the government can have over whether or not people get on boats and make this dangerous journey in pursuit of refuge. And I think it's very important that the government, accepts the ability, will attempts to do something about that.
Yeah.
Because people are dying in their hundreds, and so this is a very tragic situation. But it is a very difficult situation, and can I say it's an evolving situation? I mean, what we hear from the opposition is they had a prescription, it worked as if it would work today. The truth of the matter is that that people smugglers work their way around systems, and you need to evolve with them. And we do have a different set of circumstances today. And the opposition don't even believe in their own policies, because if they did, and if they were fair income about turning the boats back, well, then Tony Abbott would have raised that with the president of Indonesia when he had the chance. But he didn't, because Indonesia won't accept that as a policy. So it doesn't. It's just not practical. It's not credible.
Okay, look, I'll ask Kelly to respond to that, and I'm sure there'll be some callers as well. But just let me ask you briefly, the fact that Save the Children will be looking after children on Manus Island, both Amnesty International and the UNHCR have raised significant objections with the way that people are being treated on Nauru. Do you think you need to change radically the way people are processed in Nauru, or are you pretty much on track, because the UNHCR and Amnesty International don't think you are?
Well, I don't think it's a surprise that Amnesty International have said what they've said in the context of not being supportive of offshore processing. And we need to be very clear about the facts. People on Nauru are receiving care. They're receiving food, water, shelter, medical care. They're being provided with activities, sporting activities, with English language classes. They're living under pretty similar circumstances to Department of Immigration officials who are at the facility as well. So that's the fact of the matter. Now, it is a temporary facility. We haven't built the permanent facility yet. Obviously, it'll be better when we do. But the basics are being provided.
People
here.
are still on hunger strike, though.
Well, people are obviously unhappy with their situation, but the fact of the matter is that what we had prior to this was people making a really dangerous journey in pursuit of refuge, where people were dying in their hundreds, and that's what we have to stop.
I'll give Kelly a chance to respond, but let's just have Robert in Mount Martha have a word to us, and then I'll give Kelly the first right of reply to whatever it is that Robert has to say. Hi there, Robert.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Good. What did you want to say?
Look, just to remind Kelly that these poor people, these people who find themselves in desperate situations, are not illegal people. By any definition, they're not illegal. And the Conservatives keep using this phrase, and it is appalling that they keep using that phrase. They are not illegal. The United Nations says they have every right to seek the shelter that they're seeking. Thank you.
Let's give Kelly a chance to respond.
Well, Robert, look, thanks very much for calling up in your comments, but I would have to take issue with you. What I said was that we're seeing illegal entry, and that is something that is mentioned in the Charter itself. We don't have any problem with people seeking refuge, and as I said, we absolutely say that it's critically important that in Australia we uphold our obligations and we do have a generous resettlement scheme. But what we do say as well is that it is absolutely abhorrent to us that you would have people smugglers determining who it is that is able to get on and off a boat and have to pay a very significant amount of money for that privilege. We think that is the wrong way to go about it when we've got people who from generation after generation are actually sitting in refugee camps overseas, trying very hard, very desperate, similar sort of circumstances to come to Australia as well to begin their new life. So I would take issue with you with respect to your point, but I think we can all agree.
Can I just ask a question about illegal? Pretty sure, I didn't get a chance to go back and listen to Tony Abbott's press conference from Perth, but he's been quoted by a few people saying it's illegal to come to Australia without some form of papers, without some form of passport. I know he's been queried on that. What's your position? Is it legal or illegal to come here and seek asylum without any identification papers?
Well, we're very concerned if people deliberately destroy their papers, and we've said that obviously when you look at somebody who is claiming asylum and they have deliberately sought to destroy their papers.
Whether or not it's illegal. Do you think it's illegal?
Well, look, what we have said is exactly what the Charter has said, which is that people who come here by boat illegally. That's under the Charter. People can seek refuge when they're here, and obviously we process that, and we process that in the ordinary course of events. What we don't want to see, though,
look, I don't personally know the answer to the question myself, but I don't know that you've answered whether or not you think it's illegal to come without papers.
Well, look, there are some people who don't have papers, so I'm not going to cast aspersions on those people who, for whatever reason, don't have papers. But what I would say is that there are people who deliberately destroy papers in order to create some confusion about where they're coming from and whether or not their claim can be assessed quickly and as a legitimate claim for refugee status. So we would have concern with that. Sure. I'm sure the government would similarly have very strong concerns with that.
I'll let Richard respond to that, but let's just have a word to Peter, who's called in from Beaumaris as well. Hi there, Peter.
Hi, Raph. How are you?
Good. What did you want to say?
Just a quick question for Kelly. Just in relation to the numbers she was referring to before and how there's been a spike in boat people coming across. Wouldn't you need to take into consideration the fact that the war has just ended in Sri Lanka and hence there's a larger number of Tamils trying to escape the situation there, and on top of that you've also got a lot of people coming in from the Middle East, and half the Middle East has imploded in the last 4 years as well. So I think you'll find that people exiting those countries have exploded to whatever destination they're choosing to go to.
So, Peter, you're saying many more conflicts since the coalition were in power. That explains the numbers, I guess. Kelly O'Dwyer?
Well, no, the facts simply don't support that. We know it's strong pull factors in this country that has seen a huge spike in increases in the number of people coming to Australia, because you only need to look at the figures to know that. And when you consider,
not a fact, isn't it?
Yeah, but when you can, no, that it's true. I mean, you only need to actually look at some of the stats that have come out from the UN refugee bodies themselves, where they actually look at the number of people seeking asylum in other countries, which has fallen quite dramatically, and the number of people seeking asylum in Australia, which has increased very dramatically. So I don't think in exactly the same period of time. So I don't think you can possibly say that. There are very strong pull factors here, and it's as a result of the government's policies.
I'll have to return to both Kelly O'Dwyer and Richard Marles. Fight Club, Richard Marles is with me from the Labor Party, Kelly O'Dwyer from the Liberal Party. I will return to your calls in a moment, but I think, two things to keep your eye on in the election next year. One, the poll rise off a pretty low floor, but the poll rise for the ALP may have stopped. Perhaps the most significant thing, though, for the federal election next year is a corruption inquiry in New South Wales, where the prosecutor leading the charge against some ex-Labor ministers says it is the worst corruption since the Rum Corps. The allegation, unproven so far, is that some former Labor politicians and their families benefited to the tune of $100 million. It's a pretty serious allegation. I can see the testimony from this inquiry already being prepared by the federal Liberal Party for an election ad. Just have a little listen to Tony Abbott speaking in Perth today. When he talks about Sussex Street, he's talking about the Labor Party headquarters in Sydney in New South Wales.
And let's never forget that the Sussex Street machine, which gave us Eddie Obeid, which gave us Ian MacDonald, which gave us the stinking patronage culture that really did sour things in New South Wales under the former Labor government there. That same Sussex Street machine was the source of the political assassination of Kevin Rudd, and it is now sustaining the current government in Canberra.
That's Tony Abbott speaking today. The politicians he mentioned are the former Labor politicians who are part of this corruption inquiry. Richard Marles, I am going to start with you. I don't want to get into the complexities of the story and whether or not it's right or wrong, but this is a huge problem for the Labor Party, isn't it? You've got the worst corruption allegations in Australian political history in New South Wales, which is the biggest state, as you head into a federal election year.
Well, firstly, I think this is a breathtaking comment that we've just heard from Tony Abbott, from a man who in the last 2 weeks has said that he wants to rise above the politics of smear in terms of our national debate. Because, look, what's going on in New South Wales, if the allegations that are being made in the ICAC trials there are, of course, if they are proved to be true, are abhorrent. No question about that. But they are allegations being made in relation to a former minister of a former or a previous state Labor government. Now, Tony Abbott is taking that event from which he is finding the very biggest brush he can and attempting to tar everybody in his path, and that is patently unfair. And what that is exactly the politics.
But you have a huge problem because the people in Western Sydney don't have the time to delve into the complexity. All they hear is Labor politicians' worst corruption case ever. That's a significant problem if you want to win government again.
Well, what I actually think is that what people want to hear is the issues which matter to them. They want to know about the way in which the economy is going, about the jobs in the economy. They want to know about the extent to which their government is concerned about social reform, such as the National Disability Insurance Scheme. I mean, on all of these measures, you've got a government which is acting, which has produced one of 7 economies in the world, which is a AAA rating by every one of the 3 international credit rating agencies. That's what people are interested in. They're not interested in the politics of smear, which is why Tony Abbott a couple of weeks ago said he wants to rise above it, but he cannot help himself. Well, so what we've got here is an issue which if proven to be true, and there's, we don't want to prejudge that, relates to a previous state Labor government and a previous minister in that, and he's trying to tar this federal government with that brush.
Now, regardless of whether or not Kelly O'Dwyer, it is a significant problem, which it very easily could be. Richard has a point, doesn't he? The stretch from corruption allegation of a decade ago through to the machinations within the Labor Party that led to Kevin Rudd being replaced by Julia Gillard. I mean, they're a world apart, aren't they?
Well, I think it was a very nice try by Richard to try and put some distance between some of the players involved in New South Wales and the players who are currently still engaged in the Labor Party in New South Wales, but also heavily engaged in being strong supporters of Julia Gillard. I think it was a very nice try.
You cannot come up with one name who was involved with Eddie O'Beard and Ian MacDonald, those Labor ministers.
Well, I can certainly tell you that Bob Carr was in the previous New South Wales government.
But he wasn't Premier then. He wasn't Premier at the time of these allegations, when Bob Carr's no longer Premier.
But he is now the Foreign Affairs Minister. You've got a number of players who were involved in the organisation of the ALP in New South Wales, who are still involved in the organisation in the ALP. These are very serious allegations.
None of whom are linked to the corruption then.
Well,
who are involved in the coup last year.
No. You're asking where are the common elements? There are some significant common players who were involved in New South Wales politics around that time, who are now involved in federal politics. These are very serious allegations. These are not allegations that have
Kelly,
been
if you want to say that, who was involved then, who's involved now?
Well, you talk about Eddie O'Beard and you talk about the number of people who are engaged in the Labor Party. I don't have a list of all of the people who are engaged in the back room.
You said that people were involved. You can't say people are involved and then not come up with names.
No. But those people who were supportive of challenging all of those New South Wales premiers, getting rid of them, those people, like Bib and others, are the sort of people who are involved in supporting Julia Gillard as Prime Minister. It's the same New South Wales factionalism that we have seen imported to Canberra. And when
we're not
Richard,
saying Mark Bib was related to any corruption.
Well, I'm not. What I'm saying. Just let me finish. I gave you a really good go, Richard. Which was, it's all very well to say Tony Abbott is making these smears, but of course that's not the case at all. You've got people at ICAC who are saying that this is the worst worst corruption scandal that they have seen in Australia's history, and it's very serious. We need to look at it closely, and it concerns us. And the government and the New South Wales Labor Party and the various people who are involved in this have all got very serious questions that they need to answer. And I think it's very concerning when people in this day and age want to see integrity in politics, when they want to see real leadership, not just talk. I mean, you talk about action, but frankly, this government's been much better at talk than they have been about action. When you look at the fact that we have seen polling just recently on the weekend where people are totally distressed about the state of politics and the state of federal politics, I think you can put it down to the fact that people no longer have confidence in the character of many of the people engaged in politics right now.
Richard?
Well, I mean, what the prosecutor is saying is in relation to Eddie Obeid. It is not in relation to Mark Arbib. It is not in relation to Bob Carr. It is not in relation to any person who is in the federal parliament today and who is a part of the Gillard Labor government. And that's the only point I'm making. And what we're seeing with Tony Abbott today is an attempt to take a brush from those events a decade ago in a state government in New South Wales and tar this federal Labor government with that brush. Now, there is no doubt that they're serious allegations. No one's going to contest that. But they are allegations in relation to a former minister of a former government.
Okay. I want to leave it there if we can. I raise it because I am sure that the opposition will be pushing this next year. A great way to catch up on this, if none of it makes sense, there's a journalist at the Australian Financial Review called Neil Chenoweth. He's written some great articles. If you put his name, Corruption Inquiry and Australian Financial Review into a search engine, you can begin to understand it's an extraordinary story. How much of it's true? We'll have to wait for the ICAC hearings to finish in Sydney. Richard Marles, thanks so much for joining us. Kelly O'Dwyer as well. That was great.
Thanks,
Raph.
Appreciate you both taking the time. We will find out the weather for you in a moment. Many of